The year was 1975. Clint Eastwood sat across from three studio executives who had just delivered what they thought was devastating news. His contract was finished. His latest film had underperformed. And at 45 years old, they told him, he was too old to be a leading man anymore. "This will be your last film," the head of production said with a condescending smile. Clint listened without interrupting. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and said 6 words that would echo through Hollywood for the next 50 years. What happened in the months that followed would transform him from a fading star into one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. The conference room on the 9th floor of Universal Studios smelled like leather and expensive coffee. 3 executives sat on one side of the polished mahogany table. Clint Eastwood sat on the other, alone. The head of production was a man named Gerald Marks, 57 years old, silver hair, the kind of perpetual tan that came from tennis courts and poolside lunches. He had been in the business for 30 years, and he believed he understood how Hollywood worked better than anyone. "Let me be direct with you, Clint," Marks said. "The Iger sanction didn't perform. The reviews were mixed. The numbers were disappointing. I've had disappointments before. I've also had hits." "That's true. But the industry is changing. Audiences want younger faces. They want new energy. The Western is dying. The tough guy roles you've built your career on, they're becoming obsolete." Clint said nothing. He just watched. "Your contract ends with this last picture," Marks continued. "And frankly, we don't see a path forward. You've had a good run, better than most. But it might be time to think about what comes next." "What comes next?" "Retirement. Television, maybe. Character roles." Marks spread his hands. "There's no shame in acknowledging when a chapter has ended. So what you're telling me is that this will be my last film." "At Universal, yes. And probably elsewhere, too." Marks smiled the smile of a man who enjoyed delivering bad news. "The business has moved on, Clint. It's nothing personal." Clint was quiet for a long moment. The 3 executives watched him, waiting for the anger, the pleading, the desperation they had seen from so many aging stars when the end came. Instead, Clint nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty, Gerald." Marks blinked. He hadn't expected gratitude. "I appreciate you taking the time to explain your position. It helps me understand where things stand. I'm glad we could have this conversation. But I have to disagree with your assessment." The temperature in the room dropped. "Excuse me? You said the business has moved on. You said audiences want younger faces. You said the Western is dying." Clint leaned forward slightly. "All of that might be true, but you left out something important." "What's that?" "You left out that you don't know what you're talking about." Marks's face reddened. "Now wait just a minute." "No, I don't think I will." Clint stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. "You've been in the business 30 years, Gerald. And in those 30 years, how many films have you actually made? How many have you directed? How many have you written? That's not my job. Your job is to identify talent and develop projects. And you've just told one of your most consistent earners that he's finished." Clint straightened his jacket. "I'd say you're not very good at your job." Marks stood up, his face purple with rage. "You can't talk to me like that. I run this studio's production. You run a bureaucracy. You shuffle papers and take meetings. The people who actually make movies, the directors, the actors, the crews, they do the real work. Get out of my office." "With pleasure." Clint walked toward the door. "But before I go, let me tell you something." He turned back to face the 3 executives. "You said this will be my last film. Here's my response." He paused. "I'll see you at the Oscars." Then he walked out, closing the door softly behind him. The 3 executives looked at each other. Marks laughed. "Did you hear that? The Oscars. The man is delusional." But something about the certainty in Clint's voice had unsettled them. Something that would keep Gerald Marks awake that night, and many nights after. Clint drove home with his mind racing. He wasn't angry. Anger was useless energy. He was focused. He was planning. Gerald Marks had made a mistake. He had assumed that Clint Eastwood was just another actor, someone who depended on studio approval to work, someone who could be discarded when he was no longer convenient. Marks was wrong. During the drive, Clint made a mental list of everything he had learned in 20 years of making movies. He knew how to act. He knew how to direct. He knew how to manage a production. He knew the technical side, the creative side, the business side. More importantly, he had something most actors didn't have: his own production company. Malpaso Productions had been founded in 1967. It had produced several of Clint's films, but always in partnership with major studios. The studios provided the money. Clint provided the talent. What if that arrangement changed? What if Clint didn't need their money anymore? By the time he pulled into his driveway, he had the outline of a plan. It would be risky. It would be expensive. It would put everything he had built on the line. But it would also prove, once and for all, that Clint Eastwood was not finished. The script arrived 3 days later. It was called The Outlaw Josie Wales, a Western about a Missouri farmer who becomes a hunted outlaw after Confederate guerrillas murder his family. It was violent, emotional, and unlike anything Clint had done before. The studio had passed on it months ago. Too dark, too long, not commercial enough. Clint read it in one sitting. When he finished, he knew. This was the film that would prove Gerald Marks wrong. But there was a problem. The script needed work. The director attached to the project wasn't right. And Universal owned the rights. Clint picked up the phone. "Get me the rights to Josie Wales," he told his lawyer. "Whatever it costs." Universal won't sell. They passed on it, but they're holding it for, then find out what they want. Everyone has a price. "Clint, are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The negotiation took 2 weeks. Universal wanted Clint to star in 2 more action films, cheap productions designed to squeeze the last value from his fading brand. In exchange, they would release the rights to The Outlaw Josie Wales. Clint agreed to 1 film. He demanded final cut on that film, and he wanted the Josie Wales rights transferred immediately. "He's in no position to make demands," Marks told the legal team. "Actually, he is," Universal's chief counsel replied. "His contract gives him certain approvals. If he refuses to work, we can't force him. We'd be stuck in litigation for years. Then we wait him out. He's not the waiting type." Eventually, a compromise was reached. Clint would make 1 more film for Universal, a cop movie called The Enforcer. He would have creative approval, but not final cut, and the Josie Wales rights would be his. The deal was signed on a Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, Clint was already working on the screenplay. The Outlaw Josie Wales went into production in the fall of 1975. Clint didn't just star in the film. He directed it, produced it, and supervised every aspect of its creation. He worked 18-hour days. He fought with the studio over every creative decision. He spent his own money when the budget ran short. The original director, Philip Kaufman, was fired 2 weeks into shooting. The Directors Guild protested, threatening to blacklist anyone who took over the project. Clint took over anyway. "Let them blacklist me," he told his agent. "I'll make the best film I can and let history decide who was right." The production was grueling. They shot in Arizona, Utah, and California. The weather was brutal. The schedule was punishing. Cast and crew complained about the pace, but they also noticed something else. Clint knew exactly what he was doing. Every shot was purposeful. Every scene was designed to build towards something larger. He wasn't just making a Western, he was making a statement. About violence, about redemption, about what it means to lose everything and keep going anyway. The film premiered in June 1976. Clint invited Gerald Marks personally. He wanted the man to see what the fading star had created while the studio had written him off. Marks didn't attend, but hundreds of others did: critics, industry insiders, ordinary moviegoers who had heard whispers about something special. The reaction was overwhelming. People applauded during scenes. They gasped at the violence. They wept at the quiet moments of humanity. When the lights came up, the audience gave a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. The reviews came next. A masterpiece of the Western genre. Eastwood proves he's not just a star, he's an artist. The best film of the year. Box office numbers followed. Opening weekend was strong. Second weekend was stronger. The film continued to build momentum throughout the summer, eventually becoming one of the highest-grossing films of 1976. Gerald Marks watched the numbers with growing disbelief. He had told Clint Eastwood that this would be his last film. Instead, it became the film that launched the next phase of his career. The success of The Outlaw Josie Wales changed everything. Studios that had ignored Clint's calls now fought to work with him. Directors who had dismissed him as just an actor sought his collaboration. Scripts poured into Malpaso Productions faster than they could be read. But Clint didn't rest on his success. He immediately began developing his next project, a psychological thriller that would prove he could work outside the Western genre. Then another. Then another. He directed. He produced. He chose projects based on creative merit rather than commercial safety. He built a body of work that was uniquely his own, and he never forgot the meeting with Gerald Marx. Not because he was bitter, Clint didn't hold grudges, but because that meeting had taught him something important about Hollywood. The people who run the business don't always understand it. They see numbers and trends and demographics. They don't see vision. They don't see potential. They don't see the things that can't be measured. Clint had learned to trust himself instead. Gerald Marx was quietly let go from Universal in 1978. The official reason was restructuring. The real reason was that his judgment had been questioned too many times. The Clint Eastwood situation was mentioned specifically in the board's discussions. "He told our biggest star to retire," one board member said, "and that star went on to prove him completely wrong. That's not the kind of leadership we need." Marx found work at smaller studios, then at independent production companies, then at nothing at all. By 1985, he was out of the business entirely. They crossed paths once more, at an industry event in 1980. Marx approached Clint during a cocktail reception. "I suppose you think you proved something," Marx said. His voice was bitter, his face aged beyond his years. Clint looked at him. "I didn't prove anything. I just did what I always do, made the best film I could." "You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. I just refused to let you define my future." Marx shook his head. "You got lucky. I got smart. There's a difference." Clint paused. "You know what your problem was, Gerald? You confused your position with your knowledge. You thought that because you sat in a big office and made big decisions, you understood this business better than the people who actually make the movies. I had 30 years of experience. You had 30 years of experience being wrong. You just didn't notice until someone called you on it." Clint raised his glass slightly. "Thanks for the motivation. I've used it every day since." He walked away, leaving Marx standing alone. The story of that meeting became Hollywood legend. It was told at industry dinners, at film schools, at business conferences. The tale of the studio executive who told Clint Eastwood he was finished, and what happened next. "I'll see you at the Oscars." Those 6 words were quoted for decades. They became a symbol of creative defiance, of artistic confidence, of the importance of trusting your own vision. Clint himself rarely talked about the incident. When asked, he would shrug and say it was just another meeting, just another obstacle to overcome. He didn't believe in dwelling on the past. He believed in working on the next project. But privately, he kept a copy of that day's datebook in his desk. The entry read, "Meeting with Marx. Told me I'm finished." Below that, in Clint's handwriting, "We'll see." He looked at it sometimes when he needed motivation, when a project was difficult, when the critics were harsh, when the business seemed determined to push him aside. He would look at that entry and remember. They told him this would be his last film. They were wrong. In 1992, Clint Eastwood directed and starred in Unforgiven. It was a Western, the genre that Gerald Marx had declared dead back in 1975. It was dark, complex, and deeply personal. It asked difficult questions about violence and redemption and what we leave behind when we're gone. The film won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Clint won Best Director. He stood on that stage, holding the Oscar, and looked out at an audience that included many people who had doubted him over the years. Some of them were in the audience. Some of them were watching at home. He didn't gloat. He didn't reference old grievances. He simply thanked the people who had helped make the film possible. But everyone in Hollywood knew what that moment meant. 17 years earlier, a studio executive had told him he was finished. Now he was standing on the biggest stage in the industry, holding its highest honor. "I'll see you at the Oscars." Promise kept. Decades later, a young filmmaker asked Clint about that meeting with Gerald Marx. They were on the set of one of Clint's later films. He was in his 80s by then, still working, still creating, still defying expectations. What did you learn from that experience? The filmmaker asked. Clint thought about it. I learned that other people's opinions don't define you. Their predictions don't limit you. Their lack of vision doesn't affect what you can see. But weren't you scared? They were telling you your career was over? They were telling me what they believed. That's different from what's true. Clint shrugged. In this business, in any business, there will always be people who want to tell you what's possible and what isn't. Most of the time, they're protecting themselves. They're afraid to take risks, so they tell you the risks can't be taken. What do you do when that happens? You listen politely. You consider whether they might have a point, and then you do what you were going to do anyway. The young filmmaker smiled. That simple? It's not simple at all. It's the hardest thing in the world. Clint's eyes met his. But it's also the only thing that matters. You have to believe in yourself when nobody else does, because if you don't, you've already lost. He stood up to return to work. They told me this will be your last film. I made that film, and then I made another one, and I'm still making them. He walked toward the set. That's the only answer to doubt. Not words, work. The young filmmaker watched him go, this man in his 80s, still commanding a set, still creating art, still proving everyone wrong. They had told Clint Eastwood that he was finished. What happened next became Hollywood lore. And the lesson was simple. Never let anyone else write your ending.